So the framers were very worried that elections could be corrupted. They could be corrupted in a variety of different ways, and they spent a lot of time trying to design an election system that wouldn't be subject to that kind of corruption. And there are a number of different provisions in the Constitution that deal with the kinds of corruption they were worried about. Two that I'd just like to highlight here, because I think they go to this idea about the national interest and foreign governments, are one that seems today, I think, to most of us to be really a kind of remnant of a past time, which is if you become an American citizen, almost everything in this country is open to you. You can become Chief Justice of the United States. You can become Secretary of State. But the one office that's not open to you, even though you're a citizen just like all of the rest of us, is the presidency because of the natural-born citizen clause of the Constitution. And the reason they put that in is they were so worried about foreign influence over a president. The other clause, which, probably no one had heard of 5 years ago, but now everybody talks about, is the Emoluments Clause. They were really worried that the president, because he was only going to be in office for a little while, would use it to get everything he could, and he would take gifts from foreign countries, not even necessarily bribes, but just gifts, and they were worried about that as well. So they were very concerned about those elections. But it's not just them, and I want to say something about what our national interest is today, because our national interest today is different in some important ways than it was in 1789. What the framers were worried about was that we would be a weak country and we could be exploited by foreign countries. Now, we're a strong power now, the strongest power in the world. We can still be exploited by foreign countries. But the other thing that we've done, and this is one of the things that I think we as Americans should be proudest of, is we have become what John Winthrop said in his sermon in 1640 and what Ronald Reagan said in his final address to the country as he left office. We have become the shining city on a hill. We have become the nation that leads the world in understanding what democracy is. And one of the things we understand most profoundly is it's not a real democracy. It's not a mature democracy if the party in power uses the criminal process to go after its enemies. And I think you heard testimony, the Intelligence Committee heard testimony about how it isn't just our national interest in protecting our own elections. It's not just our national interest in making sure that the Ukraine remains strong and on the front line so they fight the Russians there and we don't have to fight them here. But it's also our national interest in promoting democracy worldwide. And if we look hypocritical about this, if we look like we're asking other countries to interfere in our election, if we look like we're asking other countries to engage in criminal investigations of our president's political opponents, then we're not doing our job of promoting our national interest in being that shining city on a hill.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.